afternoon. I think it's almost afternoon. My name is Brianna, and I'm a senior psychology major over at UNC Asheville. And when Ben asked me to introduce him, I said, absolutely, sure. And of course, it comes along with the magic that you'll see in a little bit. Ben and I met almost a year ago at the when a couple of UNC Asheville students joined a couple of community members to go to Selma, Alabama for the 50th anniversary of the bridge crossing. And I got to know Ben over the course of a few days, and I was especially impressed by his magic skills. What I just mentioned, you'll see a little bit of that. I was always just baffled at how I could be tricked right in front of my own eyes. I just couldn't figure out where the trick was, but you'll see a little bit of that for yourself. Let's see. He didn't have a long-standing history with music, or magic, sorry, not music, including a performance at the famous Mack Castle in Hollywood when he was 14 years old. And this performance earned him the Award of Merit, making him the youngest magician to win this award. Ben just turned 48 years old, and he was diagnosed with Aspergers syndrome when he was 44, but had been asking whether or not he was autistic since age 24. So today he will share his experience with you with Asperger's, happiness, and sex. Mature content, obviously. So just wanted to give that heads up, and please help me welcome him in.
Thank you, Anna. Curious, does anybody have the sense can we applaud in here? No? No? Okay, all good, thank you. No. Grateful, hence my asking. I understand that there are reasons, and hence my asking for a reason. And I know you and I have danced together before, and sometimes I can come across to folks as caustic, which in business has served me well. In neurolinguistic programming, they call my type of thinking and style sometimes a polarity responder. So that somebody can say, this cannot be the case, and I've got a mind that can often very quickly say, oh, but what about here? And it's an actual instance where it might work. And that's actually really common among Aspies. And it's also part of why I don't necessarily hang out with a lot of Aspie groups, because as other people find me challenging, I find other Aspies challenging at times. Part of what's great about certain Aspie groups is the ground rules that it's okay to remove yourself from a situation and to step back in. Dig that about Aspies. In order for me to get Anna to introduce me, and thank you for speaking up about your needs, in order for me to get Anna to introduce me, she said, well, Ben, I will, but you have to do a magic trick. So we're gonna do some magic. Magic is what paid my way through UCLA. And Tammy, would you mind helping me with a card trick? I'll take that as a no, I don't mind. Awesome. I'm Ben, and you are Tammy. Pleased to meet you. Here we go. What I'm gonna have you do, if you don't mind, is select a playing card. Here, pick me, Tammy, pick me, okay, fine. Okay. Show them the card, I won't look. I'll do a quick impression for you. Watch this. It's a card shark. Okay. It's jokes like this that kept me from being a professional. Tammy, call stop as I go through the pack. Throw your card back in there, hopelessly losing your card towards the center of the pack. I do want to thank Hammond Antiques for gifting me this pack of playing cards. So in a certain way, they are a sponsor of today's show. They're in Burnsville. Ralph Hammond just turned 80. Oh, okay. Has little to do with the presentation here other than this pack of cards. Can you shuffle cards?
No, not
okay,
really.
I shall shuffle them. You remember your playing card?
Yes.
That's critical. Otherwise, I come to the end of the trick, I say this was it, you say I don't remember. The whole thing kind of,
sure.
Awesome. Place your hand palm up. Perfect, a little bit flatter. Your playing card would be the 10 of hearts, correct?
No.
Seriously?
Seriously.
That wasn't her card. What was your card?
5 of hearts.
Thank you. Yeah, give her some hand waves. Thank you, Tammy. I'm going to ask you to help me out, if you will, and touch a playing card for me. Any idea what that playing card would be? If we took a look and it just happened to be her 5 of hearts. Now here, watch closely. I'm going to take the 5, I'll place it towards the center of the pack, a little riffle, a snap, and it jumps back up the top of the pack. Hours of practice, years and years of self-denial, and you guys look like people come to your work and do this for you at lunchtime. One of the things that I got good at in magic was what I later called emotionally upselling. And that was sort of teasing an audience into giving me a bigger reaction than they might otherwise do. And that served me extraordinarily well when later on I went into advertising. Because the primary job in advertising and branding is to emotionally upsell people. In branding, my job was to get customers to pay an irrationally high premium price for a good or service. Now, how I paid my way through UCLA was by getting people to pay an irrationally high premium price for services of me as a magician. We're going to get to the Aspergers, happiness, and sex in a moment, but I'd like to show you the trick that paid my way through UCLA. Is that all right? Before we get into it, great. My name is Ben, your name is?
Stuart.
Stuart, would you be open to helping me with a card trick?
I can help you.
Excellent. Stuart, would you like to see the most amazing card trick you've ever seen in your entire life?
Yes.
Now you say yes kind of quickly.
I mean, I want to.
Excellent.
Okay.
At the end of the trick, I'm going to ask you, Stuart, was this the most amazing card trick you've ever seen in your entire life? Or was this not the most amazing card trick you've ever seen in your entire life? Will you be able to be honest with me and tell me whether or not this was or was not the most amazing card trick you've ever seen in your entire life? Because you see, a lot of people will say yes, but because of social obligations, at the end they'll go, oh, that was great. We're not playing with great here. We're playing with whether or not this is the most amazing card trick you have ever seen in your entire life, including television.
Okay.
Can you be that honest with me?
Yes.
Fantastic. This is an invisible pack of playing cards. Can you see them? No, they're invisible.
I see you're holding something.
Thank you. It's a regular size pack. They're blue. I just happen to be holding them by the side. Take the pack, if you will, and on the invisible table, take them out of the box and shuffle them up. Very good. Stuart, spread the cards face down across the table. Push one card forward. Pick it up. Look at it. You can see it in your mind.
Okay.
It's not the 5 of hearts that we were just playing with Tammy.
That was the first thing that came to mind.
Okay. And it's not the Queen of Hearts.
No.
That's the most common card that women pick. It's not the Ace of Spades, the most common card that men pick. And so don't tell them, but just show it to everyone in the audience. I won't look. Place it face up amongst the face down cards. Shuffle the cards together. So your card, keep shuffling. Your card is the one card turned the wrong direction in the pack, yes? Mm-hmm. Great. Take the cards, place them back in the box. Close little flap. Take the entire pack and throw it at me. Boom. As if that's not amazing enough. Okay, maybe it's not. What was the one card that you turned the wrong direction in your pack?
Okay, you ready for me to say it?
Hence my asking, what was the one card you turned the wrong direction in your pack?
Queen of Spades.
The Queen of Spades, because the only card turned the wrong direction in this pack is this one playing card.
That's the most amazing card trick, honestly. I haven't really seen too many card tricks.
Oh, sure, now you're going to disqualify it. Thank you, Stuart. Let's give Stuart some hand waves. Now, what allowed me to pay my way through UCLA is that I inspired thousands of people to tell their friends. Benjamin Garth was my stage name in magic, but Benjamin Garth showed me the most amazing card trick I've ever seen in my entire life. So at the age of 19, I found a way to be able to start getting $1,000 magic shows, which made a lot of magicians jealous of me. There were a lot of magicians 2 or 3 times my age that had been making a living for decades, and I was making more than them. And like many autists, I was completely blind to many of the ways I was impacting the people around me. So about 4 years ago, I was in Los Angeles for a holiday party, and I'm at my uncle's house, and this guy goes, "Wait a minute, you're Benjamin Garth?" With like this intensity that I felt for a couple days. Because us Aspies can feel these intensities. I still have a minor vibration from when there was something dropped in the kitchen 2 hours ago. And people will say that I'm imagining that. And I'm like, no, I can feel it. It's still there. But being that sensitive to energies makes us good at doing what I like to call energy dancing. So this guy said, "Wait a minute, you're Benjamin Garth?" And I'm like, "Yes." And he says, "You are such an effing a-hole." And I said, "Let me start with, I'm sorry." And he said, "It was as recently as 3 years ago that a woman interrupted me while I was performing and said, 'Oh yeah? Well, Benjamin Garth showed me the most amazing card trick I've ever seen in my entire life.'" Had no idea of the impact I was having on the community of magicians around California. We're now going to tie this into the presentation here on Asperger's and on happiness, Asperger's, and sex, although I'm going to go in reverse order. I'm going to talk about sex, Asperger's, and happiness. Because being diagnosed with Asperger's, I prefer to call myself an Aspie as opposed to saying a person diagnosed with Asperger's. That's my preference. Other people have other preferences, and these are strongly opinionated terms. So I'm presenting what works for me. But we're going to, we had the introduction by Anna. And we're going to jump right into talking about sex. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about Asperger's, and then paths to happiness that have worked for me. But before we begin, I want you to note that this presentation is being recorded with the idea that we're going to put it up on YouTube. By tomorrow, if you go to youdon'tlookautistic.com, it will redirect to the video of this, or maybe not by tomorrow, by the end of next week. I'm working with Conrad of Trillium Productions to help me get it up, and I don't want to rush him. Also, I am not an expert on sex, Asperger's, nor happiness. I'm regularly challenged in all three of these cases. I am an expert on me, somebody who I love. Don't expect me to be consistent. I'm evolving. I have a long track record of putting out videos of myself or other material. Here is a caption. This is me, but I many times call myself Howard Campbell. I was the only author to appropriate a character of Kurt Vonnegut's with his awareness and permission in his lifetime. So my novel, Poker Without Cards, features Howard Campbell, and many times when I perform as Howard Campbell for a number of reasons. When I talk as candidly as I've often talked in my life, it has been easier at times for me to have an avatar and to be able to say, this is a character. Even though many times in my character, I would speak more truthfully and honestly than what would be socially permittable in other situations. Along these lines with dating, and this video picture up here with Dr. Christopher Hyatt, in 2002, I interviewed Dr. Christopher Hyatt, who had been an expert on helping men in particular in the computing industry that had trouble with dating. And Dr. Hyatt would go out into dating environments to work with his patients. And he got his license revoked. Because at that point in California, you weren't allowed to practice therapy outside of an office. But I could still get therapeutic help from him. And at that point, he had moved to Phoenix and created New Falcon Publishing, and so I went and interviewed him. And this is a picture from 2002 of that interview. You can find it online, searching for Christopher S. Hyatt, unedited interview. And one thing that was fascinating to me was in 2012, I'd met a woman on an online dating site, and we'd had lunch, and things were going fairly well. And all of a sudden, she stops and she goes, "Oh my gee, you're Howard Campbell." And I did one of the smartest things I've ever done in my life. I kissed her. And she kissed me back like the rock star that she knew me to be. And it turned out that she had watched this video, she said, at least a dozen times. As OCD as she was, it might have been 30 or 50. The real challenge I had dating her was that she wasn't dating Ben Mack, she was dating Howard Campbell from 2002. So this was 2012, and I'm 10 years older. And so this last part of don't expect me to be consistent, I'm evolving. For anybody that's watching this video online, I'm a different person today. In fact, I'm a different person from when we walked in. We're all constantly evolving and changing. When I was 12, I had the great fortune of spending 3 days with Buckminster Fuller, who taught out at Black Mountain College. And he suggested to the three of us kids that spent 3 days interviewing him that we think of ourselves as a reciprocating torus. It's a fancy word for a donut where the inside becomes the outside and the outside becomes the inside. And so he said to imagine that, for instance, our head is guiding our path on spaceship Earth. And as we come into different areas, our environment saturates our inside, which recalibrates our navigational system, which changes our trajectory, which brings us into new environments which saturate, and it's a constant, ongoing, always reciprocating experience of us getting changed by our environment and changing our own path here on spaceship Earth. So along my path, we're jumping right into sex. Since I was 18 years old, I've bought books and other info products on dating and relationships. Perhaps one of the dorkiest things I did when I was 18 was I paid $30 for a book on how to date women. And it was one of the best $30 I invested. It was written by two women, and it talked about their preferences in terms of dating things and how most guys are dumbasses. And I learned so much from that book. I've repeatedly sought out expert advice, including interviewing the late Dr. Christopher Hyatt. Largely, I meet women through online dating sites. I go out with very few of them, and I'm real quick to basically say that, yeah, this isn't working for me. I've learned to identify language patterns that just aren't going to work for me. And in the past, I used to try and make it work. So many people would say, oh, you aren't really giving it an effort. You got to try and make it work. And part of what I've found is I'd prefer to work on myself by myself. And in terms of partnering, I'd prefer to be with people that appear to me as empowering me and where we're reciprocating good energy together. And so this is simply my style. However, I've generally have had more successful relationships with women who met me through my books, my videos, like the Dr. Hyatt video, I told you that story, or at seminars where I was an invited speaker. I used to speak at a lot of marketing and branding seminars. This is largely going to be it's only going to be talking about dating women, because so far I've never dated a man. Kissed a couple guys in college. Haven't found myself, someone once asked me when I was like 20 years old, they said, how do you know you're not gay? Fair question. I said, I guess it's because I've never noticed myself staring at a guy's ass as he walked in front of me. How do we know what we know? Somehow at some points we choose what we know, and we choose that we know what we know. I don't want to get into epistemology, but I choose to know that I like women, and I'm really not 100% comfortable with guys hitting on me. It's like, I'm sure women regularly aren't comfortable with guys hitting on them either. So it is. So talking about sex specifically in terms of Asperger's, asexuality or asexual communities and transgender communities often report a high incidence of members diagnosed with Asperger syndrome. Can I find any academic journal that talks about this specifically? No. You can hear it talked about in the documentary Asexual. There's a lot of studies, more and more studies, around having talks around sex with autistic teenagers. I think this is fantastic. I think getting more comfortable talking about sex and our human biology helps us all feel more normal. Oh, this is happening with you. One of the things that I have experienced personally is delayed ejaculation, an anxiety disorder where one is incapable of orgasming during sex with somebody else. It's a disorder that I overcame and is a disorder I speculate has a higher incidence among Aspies than neurotypicals. To me, this is just sort of common sense because Asperger's used to be seen as an anxiety disorder that happened to be on the autism spectrum. And delayed ejaculation is an anxiety disorder. Having met other male Aspies, or females as well, talk about challenges in terms of intimacy and orgasms, but specifically guys, they will talk about what appears to me as medical symptoms of delayed ejaculation. Now this might get controversial and I don't want to challenge anybody's identity, but to me that can look a lot like asexuality. I don't want to necessarily go there. I'm not speculating that they are the same at all. I certainly don't need the ace community coming after me as an ace basher. And one of the things I've learned about teenagers with Asperger's is that we often have looked for strong, energetic role models. You know, and if somebody says that, hey, this is actually where you normally fit in, and you get into an environment where people are very accepting, it's like, this is where I fit in. And humans as a whole have a tendency of taking on the attributes of those that are around them. We tend to flock together in certain ways, and there are some challenging issues here that can be unpacked, and I don't need to unpack them socially. I only need to unpack them for myself and what works for me. So this is talking about my experiences, and in my 20s and 30s, this was an extraordinary challenge, and I sought a lot of people to get help with it. Overcoming delayed ejaculation, I saw psychotherapists, urologists, and got testosterone treatments, which were all ineffective. My testosterone is at a normal level now, and I no longer have a job that literally stresses the F out of me. I think that the primary reason for my lower testosterone was working 80 hours a week and having a boss regularly yell at me or express his displeasure with me 8 ways from Sunday. To me, suggesting that testosterone is the answer is a little bit like having a headache and taking an aspirin. I don't know of a single doctor that ever has said that somebody has an aspirin deficiency. You know, it's not getting at the root problem. It's a temporary thing for a symptom. Do I think that testosterone can be helpful? Heck yeah. You know, before going on a 4-day weekend with a girlfriend, getting a testosterone injection, nice stuff. I could feel the effect in my body in some ways. On the other hand, getting a testosterone injection also has a tendency of making me more abrasive at times, slightly more caustic. And I don't need more of that in my life. I need more harmony and learning how to dance with more people better from my perspective. So I had an underlying anxiety that I simply couldn't shake for a long time in my life. In terms of overcoming delayed ejaculation, there were kind of 3 things that I see in hindsight as really having helped. One was getting comfortable with myself and my body was key to me overcoming delayed ejaculation. In the past, I sometimes intellectually wanted to have sex more than my body wanted to have sex. Does that make sense? I had this idea that I haven't had sex and blah, 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 and I want to have sex, and I was with somebody who was willing to be sexually intimate with me, and yet my body was saying, this ain't happening. And yet I'd try and plow through the situation because intellectually I was like, yeah, but I want to have sex. I want to have sex. And so what I learned was that I preferred to be alone than to pursue an intimate relationship that wasn't clicking on all cylinders. When I got that clear, I stopped wasting a lot of time. When I got that clear and recognized that something wasn't working with somebody, cut bait, find out who's next. I got comfortable saying, I'm not in the mood yet. It's like when I have had girlfriends at times and they come home and they're randy and I'm like, you know what? Give me half an hour and I can get there. But right now, I'm not there yet. Another thing in terms of overcoming delayed ejaculation was that when I started dating, I stopped masturbating, period. And that it was something that I read about online and in some info products. And for guys, that helps a lot, and helped me. So in terms of delayed ejaculation, I appear to myself as cured. I'd give myself applause, but yeah, thank you. Anthony. All right, now we'll talk about Asperger's. Age 48, got diagnosed, 44. It was really just over 3 years ago. I just turned 48. So I've been officially an Aspie for 3 years. However, before my diagnosis, my Aspergerian friends, a couple of them, two at least, sometimes I think it might have been a third, but I'm not positive. At least two of my Aspie friends called me an Aspie, assuming I was diagnosed and knew before I knew what an Aspie was. So I had Aspergerian friends saying, we think that you think like we think, so we think that you're part of this tribe. And I did some, I'm like, oh, that's autism. I've been thinking I was autistic since I was 24. So it goes. I've had 2 hospitalizations, both of which they labeled as bipolar. And I tell you, the second hospitalization was one of the best things to ever happen for me because I got put on SSDI. And so they said, you're psychologically unemployable, and so long as you don't fight us about this, we'll keep paying you monthly. And I realized I can do this from home. I thought that was going to get a laugh. But I've been diagnosed and prodded in different things since I was 5. At age 8, I was diagnosed as dyslexia, which doesn't make sense to me presently, but I can also understand how I would be labeled as dyslexic. I don't always have the ability to put into words answers really quickly. And so I imagine with the child psychologist that I was giving answers that might have been reverse ordered and stuff, but not from my seeing it backwards, but from my inability to orchestrate the words coming out in the right order from my mouth. When I was 5 was the first time I got diagnosed. In California, they called it MGM, a mentally gifted minor. And while I am not autistic idiot savant, by the time I was 15, I did a magic act where, in essence, I pretended I was. I did a mathemagical show. So I would do math quickly. I can square numbers in my head, but it's not like a savant who just sees the numbers and they're there. I would work it out. It's simply I can do 2-digit numbers quickly now, but when I was 15 and 16, I could square a 3-digit number in my head in less than 5 seconds. And so it looks like an idiot savant. And it played into the magic routine. And at the time, I needed to reinvent myself, which I've had to do several times in my life. When I was 14 and performing at the Magic Castle, and I got my first standing ovation when I was 14, I was like, boy, does this feel good. I want more. But I was doing a magic routine around magic props falling apart. And then sort of magically, everything falls into the piece, and in the end, everything is magically delicious. And that was really cute as a 14-year-old. But by the time I was in my late 15, close to 16 and driving, it wasn't cute anymore. You know, that 14-year-old adorable having things fall apart and then come back together was wonderful and standing ovation worthy. The notion of a 16-year-old punk up there trying to get away with it, it wasn't working. So I transitioned in my 15s to doing the mental math and to powers of the mind and things along those lines. And so while I'm not an idiot savant, part of my Asperger's is that I have a fluency with math that most people will never have. Part of what I got from spending the 3 days with Buckminster Fuller was a visual representation of math that is something that few can conceptualize, and I have a hard time putting into words. But it's like Buckminster Fuller and Einstein talk about how it's absurd to model a universe in fewer than 4 dimensions. And so I tend to see and process things in 4-dimensional models that are fluid. When I worked in consumer research and advertising, I thought about media ecology, I thought about memetics, I thought about the aquarium of thoughts and how they all flow together. Part of my qualms with Asperger's and autism is that this whole spectrum thing is 2-dimensional, which just doesn't exist in the universe. So it goes. In terms of Asperger's and just general emotional management, since I didn't get diagnosed with Asperger's until quite late. These would work for anyone, but I saw school counselors. When I was 8, my mom sent me to EST, which is now Landmark Education's The Forum, and I did that again when I was 23. I found that extraordinarily useful and helpful for me. I've seen psychotherapists since I was 24. I've tried hypnotherapy. I am an NLP, a neuro-linguistic programming practitioner, trained by Richard Bandler. Part of what I got from NLP that has been most helpful is what's formally called timeline therapy. Earlier, when I was talking about delayed ejaculation, you might have heard the framing where I said, in the past, I had these experiences. And that's important in terms of clearing the present. A lot of times I hear about people talking about a problem they had yesterday in the present tense. And they're having that problem in the present tense because they're making a present for themselves. And so as often as possible, I like to take my challenges from the past and keep them in the past, stay present in the future, and put positive and brighter ideas into my future. Mantras, I love Ho'oponopono. However, there are 4 sentences that I regularly say to myself: I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. And I repeat those mantras. Earlier, when in the opening presentation, I got challenged by somebody, and so in my head, I simply go through that and say that. Dog therapy is wonderful. I've tried group therapy, but it hasn't well worked for me. I don't like the confidentiality of group therapy. Don't like that. If somebody wanted to start a group therapy for Aspies or others where we could talk about what we talked about because what I found was that people talk about what goes on in group therapy. They're just breaking that rule. So it goes. Masterminding is a form of getting together. I use a 1-hour mastermind technique where up to 7 people can have a collaborative experience. We regularly do it weekly, and that helps ground me. We have SMART goals in it, looking for specific measurable actions that are realistic and time-bound, and I find that doing incremental progress week over week allows for me to have greater achievements than most people imagine that they can have for themselves. It's simply consistently having the intentional self-development along any course. Meditation, I will should all over myself and say I should do meditation more often than I do, but I don't, and why I don't know. So it is. Yoga is another one of those things. Psychopharmaceuticals, I use PRN. I find while I like to live as med-free as possible, it's a viable tool. For me, so is nicotine, and not all nicotine is tobacco. This is a tobacco-free campus. This is vapor. This is nicotine, but it's not tobacco. I know that it might offend some if I were to use it here, but there are no signs that say I can't ingest nicotine. The MAD map was an idea that I learned when I first came to Asheville, which is if you feel yourself going mad, have some predetermined best choices, because if you're going mad at those points, it's not the best time to make critical choices for yourself. Working with Empower Autism, and Molly, whose last name is spelt on the next page and I can't currently pronounce, we created what we called a happiness plan, which was sort of an evolution of a MAD map, which included the best practices of a MAD map, but also had best practices for what would consistently lead for me to be happier, to be happy. Now I want to talk about the looping effect. However, in autism, they often refer to the looping effect now as a person with autism saying the same thing again and again. However, Ian Hacking coined the term the looping effect in 2006 in a paper called Making Up People. And his form of the looping effect is he noticed that classifications of people affect the people classified. The labels that we call ourselves affect ourselves. There's effects on the people, in turn, change the classification. Because you wind up having a colony of people that then change how the classification system is working. And our labels create kinds of people that in a certain sense did not exist before. This is why I have a personal preference of being called an Aspie, which is strength-based. My thinking is different, and it's something that can be identified by a brain scan. Asperger's syndrome is symptom-based from our DSM-5, or now I guess DSM-4R. It's not in the DSM-5. It's my thinking is a disorder, because it's in the manual of disorders, and it's diagnosed by a psychotherapist. I have a hard time not hearing or seeing the word psychotherapist and not seeing that it is Psycho the Rapist. And while there are many kindly psychotherapists out there, I don't need to revisit the sexual traumas of being molested when I was 14. I mean, it brings up a little bit of tears, but the tears now aren't about that. I almost cried when he first came out, because sometimes I cry just because there's energy. And I find that the crying goes away fairly quickly. And so, anyways, now I'm crying. I used to get way embarrassed of the crying. And now I learned that I just kind of ignore it, roll through it, and it goes away. It's a little bit like magic in the sense of one of the biggest things you have to learn about being a professional magician is to be 100% okay with messing up. It's like if I messed up a trick and someone goes, "You messed up." Yeah, and well, it's gonna happen again. You messed up. Yeah, well, if you authentically thought I could do this, you wouldn't be sitting here applauding, you'd be kneeling and praying. So in terms of happiness, one of the head-clearing, body-calming visualizations I do goes back to what I talked about earlier with Buckminster Fuller, in terms of I will many times stand, get myself grounded, and literally visualize that there is this reciprocating torus of energy. I get the visual, and focusing on the visual clears my mind of the words. And visualizing energy colors that I find soothing, like green and purple, going from the earth up through my feet, through my body, out my head, and back around, is a great tool. But it's also something that I can't really do sometimes in audiences and sitting, so I use the Ho'oponopono. But when I've taught marketing, many times I would start by teaching this exercise, and what I found was that people would come back and say that learning this visualization technique was one of the most empowering, calming techniques that they had ever learned in their life. And the reason why it's so empowering is because learning how to self-regulate, learning how to calm down, allows us to make better decisions. A couple times in my life, I've played poker for a living, and one of the ways to be profitable is to put somebody on edge. Because you put someone on tilt, they're going to make poor decisions. So for me, happiness is often an up and down track. In many ways, I love Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And as it relates to happiness, Asperger's, and sex, when I'm battling down here with safety needs and stuff, I'm not feeling sexy. So it goes. I had challenges last year. I got beat bloody on Lexington Avenue. I had somebody put a noose out on a house that's a half block from where I was, and 2 nooses on my front porch. And talking with the cops and having them say, "Do you think it's a hate crime?" Well, it surely doesn't appear to me as a thing of love. Getting follow-up on this has been non-existent. Cecil Bothwell was a no-show for a second scheduled meeting where he was going to go to the Ashland-Buncombe County Community Relations Committee to discuss this stuff. These are some of my safety things. These go to satellites so that if I don't trust local 911, which I don't know whether or not I can trust them, when I walk to my car at night, I often do an open mic, I'll have this up, and if I press these 2 buttons, an SOS goes to distress within a satellite thing, so it's outside of local, so that people know where I had a challenge. So it helps me feel safer. I just bought one of these, but it hasn't arrived yet, and I dig it, I can wear it on my side, and it automatically tracks me. And there's a couple people who have said they'll have the website. It also has a one-button thing to send text messages, and it has an SOS button, which, similar to this, goes to 4 different emergency things. And because it's got GPS and the satellite tracking, it knows where I encountered that. So as skeptical as I am in some ways about some of the people that are supposed to be keeping me safe, this gives me a firmer grasp of safety and helps me climb back up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. In terms of happiness, I plan for happiness to the best I can. I work the plan and keep adjusting. Earlier, Sylvia asked, how many of you put 5 to 8 schedules in your calendar a week to plan to be happier? And that's great. I'm good with 3 right now. You know, if I make 3 happiness dates with myself and meet them, I'm doing well. I've implemented most of the things other than exercise from my happiness plan. I keep reading about how I would feel better if I exercised more. You know, it's sort of like reading that stuff about runner's high. You know, I wanted to see how that high felt. And so I spent about 5 months working at running until finally I got that runner's high just once. And I'm like, yeah, this just ain't worth it. One of the other elements that I'll be doing is getting some sort of camper type vehicle. This is my dream. It's an 86 Vixen. They made them for 3 years. They're diesel. They're 31 miles to the gallon. They're small. They're self-contained. But I love the idea of having my own vehicle so that if I feel like I need to get away, I can get to mountain. I can get to my favorite dog friend, and I don't need to be in imposition. I don't need to spend money on a hotel if I have this kind of self-reliance. So now I've gone over longer than I expected to be talking about these things, but magic has eaten into your Q&A time. I know we started 5 minutes late, so we'll do 6 minutes of Q&A, and I'm going to ask Anna to mediate it, because sometimes I've found that one of the things that's on the card, back on this slide, I've got this card. I talked about it last year. It's a medical alert card, but it also talks about things that are catalysts for me to have meltdowns. And sometimes folks like to ask several questions in a row. And so it helps me to have mediated experiences. It helps me to have a peer support specialist with me in a lot of public environments. So Anna will handle Q&A if you guys have questions.
I'd like to know the name of the book that was written by the women.
I don't. I wished I had. And okay. But along these lines, I do recommend, and this is controversial, especially here in Asheville, I recommend the book The Game, which is about speed seduction. And the reason why I recommend, I'm not a seduction artist. My mentor in magic was or is or whatever, but that book talks about sexual psychology and often what is a turn on or a turn off and things along those lines. And more importantly, in terms of bullying, that book taught me how to fend off. If I'm making wonderful time with a woman and some guy comes up and he's being a bully and he's just being a jerk to me, that book gave me the skills to be able to fend him off and keep my space.
I just wanted to know how I can find this on YouTube, because my wife and I are here with my 15-year-old son, and I want him to see all this when he's ready for it.
If you search on YouTube for Ben Mack and autism, you'll surely find it. The current plan, and it will be up by the end of next week, the current plan is that the domain youdon'tlookautistic.com will redirect to it. Okay. Since that's the most often thing that I hear from people, and a topic perhaps for another day.
If one is asexual, how does one explain this to one's friends, family, and other people? I've had friends before who I've told this to, and they completely could not get me whatsoever. They were stuck in the gay straight box as far as their thinking.
I'm not asexual. That's a huge challenge, and I don't know how to help you.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry.
Any other questions?
Let's give Anna a wave of hands. And if you liked this presentation, my name is Ben Mack, and if you didn't, it's Howard Campbell. Thanks, guys.